Hello, everyone. Um, that's not really what I want, what I wanted to do today. But here goes. Henri Lammens and um, uh, Charles Hayek. Um, Henri Lammens is probably one of the most recognized or recognizable names among post-colonialist, postmodernists of the Edward Said school. And one of the most vilified Lebanese Jesuits. And I call Henri Lammens Lebanese not because he was born in Lebanon. Of course, we all know he was not. I mean, at least those who know him know that he was born in Gaulle in Belgium, 1862. So he was not Lebanese that way, but he referred to himself as a Lebanese in his writings in Arabic and in French. He refers to uh, us, nous autres Libanais, and so he speaks about Lebanon in the possessive. Um, and in many ways, he may be referred to, without disrespect, as the father of modern Lebanese nationalism. So that's a given. Yes, he was a militant Jesuit, militant because he loved his subject matter, Eastern Christians, namely the Christians of Lebanon, and without compunctions, he advocated on their behalf. Sue him. Uh, but don't resort to silly postmodernist ad hominem, calling him an Orientalist and meaning it as an insult, and an instrument of French colonialism. Uh, the only the, what's his name? Kamal Salibi is the only one who says, and he asks a question, and he says probably Henri Gouraud asked Henri Lammens to write La Syrie précis historique. That is not corroborated in any sources. Uh, any modern historian who has excavated the archives, especially the French National Archives and the Quai d'Orsay archives, and all the internal memos between de Gaulle and the Quai d'Orsay, the private papers of Robert de Quay, not there isn't a single, and there are financial ledgers in all of these documents. Every penny that the French paid in the Levant is documented. There isn't a single reference to the French government paying Henri Lammens or asking him to produce a guide on Syria and Lebanon in order to facilitate uh, colonialist um, their colonialist enterprise in Lebanon and Syria. Um, so going back to Henri Lammens and the accusation of him being an Orientalist, Orientalism is not an insult, um, and there was no French colonialism in Lebanon. You need to seriously peel yourselves away from them silly platitudes about French colonialism in Lebanon. There was no French colonialism in Lebanon. Franco-Lebanese connections precede the Mandate period by at least one millennium, dating back to the Crusades. Yes, this is going to trigger some, uh, but those relations also go back at least half a millennium if we are to limit ourselves only to the foundation of the Maronite College in Rome, 1580 something. I don't have time for childish antics today, but if you want to learn anything about Franco Lebanese relations outside of the boring 20th century postmodernist cliches, I would start with Salim Abou's Le bilinguisme arabe-français au Liban. A research based, serious, deeply searching work of cultural history and social anthropology. Half of the book is just footnotes, and it's very different from your run-of-the-mill Fawaz Trabulsi and the latter-day footnotes-free Kamal Salibi's screeds. So if you're interested in French colonialism in the Levant start with Salim Abu. It is not, there's no such thing. There's no French colonialism, whether cultural, military, etc. Yes, Lammens was an Orientalist, and that is truly an element of pride, not an insult, as Edward Said epigons make that noble profession out to be. Orientalism in the Saidist conception, or in the sadist conception of the field, is a simplistic, ahistorical, reductionist, essentialist term of abuse. And incidentally, Said himself, who raged against essentialists, was himself deliciously essentialist in his definition of Orientalism and Orientalists. By the way, he left out Russian and German Orientalists from his hit piece, Orientalism, because, you guessed it, he only knew English. He only could read English and a smattering of French and some very primitive, very elementary Arabic. That's not how a serious scholar of the Middle East works. But whatever. In short, Said, and it seems his modern Lebanese epigons, Charles Hayek perhaps, view the noble academic field of Orientalism as a Western colonialist, racist rendering of the East. In Said's words, quote, "an ineradicable distinction between Western superiority and Oriental inferiority," end of quote, whatever that means. Yet, Henri Lammens' crime was that he was a Belgian-born lover of Eastern Christendom who adopted a Lebanese Maronite identity. He was ordained, I think he was ordained in the Maronite Church. He was a precocious, erudite, polyglot philologist and literary scholar, intimately acquainted with the languages and histories of the subject of his inquiry: Arabic, Hebrew, Syriac, Turkish, Latin, Greek, and German. He spoke those languages in addition to his native Flemish and French. Henri Lammens researched and wrote about the East and Islam from a supposedly turgid, smug perch of a Catholic activist contemptuous of Islam and dedicated to Eastern Christendom, the birthplace of Judeo-Christian civilization. Now, expecting a priest among subdued, forgotten, reduced Near Eastern Christians to be uncritically making the case for a dominant and domineering Islam that doesn't fit our modern conceptions today of tolerance, etc., to do that to the neglect of his own flocks, to whom, let's face it, he had not only a moral and intellectual obligation, but indeed, as a priest, he had a pastoral obligation to the Christians of the East. So expecting him to make nice and sort of poo-poo what the Muslim conquest wrought is not only silly, it's very silly, and it's historically dishonest. Because Muslim scholars have indeed written beatifically about Christians in their midst, perhaps. Come on, let's get serious. As Charles Isawi put it very aptly, and he was in the process, he was excoriating Edward Said as if he were a child. He writes, Said ought to be intelligent enough to know that everybody is imperfect, everybody is biased, everybody sees only part of the truth, everybody is a child of his age and his culture. Said is not an exception, Henri Lammens is not an exception, and certainly Charles Hayek, despite his affectations to the contrary, is not an exception. He does have an agenda. He sees Lammens and Europe through the agenda of Said's eyes, just like European scholars see the East through European eyes. I mean, Charles Isawi asks, what other eyes could they have seen things through? You are either centric, Eurocentric, Sinocentric, Muslim-centric, Arabocentric, Syrocentric, or you are an eccentric. This is from Charles Isawi. And so, warranted as might be the post-colonialists' hostility towards Henri Lammens, it is only a reflection of their own biases and their distortions of Henri Lammens's work and its purpose, rather than legitimate criticisms. And so, in the sort of short snippet that I saw this morning on Twitter, it's hard to distinguish in what was being said. It's hard to distinguish between honest questions or honest accusations, distinguish them from willful misrepresentations. And I think there were a lot of misrepresentations and oversimplifications. Again, Lammens certainly had a militant Catholic agenda, and the fervor with which he investigated, the fervor with which he parsed out and decorticated Arabic sources, especially in terms of what Islam had wrought, and in what Islam had wrought in what was once Christian lands. The way he did that was largely motivated by his critical view of Islam, the religion, and Islam, the interloper and subjugator of Eastern Christendom. Again, where is the problem? Robert Irwin stresses that Lammens's pastoral and moral animus vis-a-vis colonial Islam ought not invalidate his findings about Islam, the religion, its mission, its ambition, and its political behavior vis-a-vis of the Christians and Jews of the Near East. All of these topics, Lammens systematically subjected to ruthless scrutiny. What's more, there's nothing peculiar about a people considering themselves to be the greatest and viewing others as less so, if that indeed were what Lammens and the Orientalists were doing. This is called the human condition. Islam and militant Muslim scholars do not do likewise. They don't view themselves as, I'm talking about scholars here, I'm not talking about your run-of-the-mill Joe Schmo on the street. So nobody is different from the Chinese, from the Greeks, from the Hebrews. We all write about ourselves, our cultures, in a perhaps overly laudatory way, but that's the human condition. Arabs and Muslims broke history and recently broke the internet, like Kim Kardashian's hindsight. Extolling their own virtues and denigrating, if not outright erasing, any references to precursor cultures. What is peculiar about Lammens and about European scholars in that vein, Orientalists, for a variety of reasons, is perhaps the fact, and again, those reasons are not necessarily altruistic, but for a variety of reasons, they took an interest in other cultures and set out to study them, write about them, memorialize them, sometimes dig them up from oblivion. And they did so sometimes in an overly laudatory manner, and sometimes in comparing and contrasting. How do you study something if you don't compare it and contrast it to something that you know? And that may entail a touch of hubris, but so what? It is in this same vein that I wish to suggest that for all his failings, Henri Lammens's contributions were invaluable, unearthing Oriental non-material and material culture, deciphering their texts, interpreting their effects, and in that sense, Lammens is indeed a victim of injustice and academic malevolence by the normative chic that post-colonialists and their modern paragons are parroting in their interventions on Twitter and other platforms. I forget what platform the snippet that was on Twitter this morning came from. Lammens probed deeply. He probed uncomfortably into the Middle East and an Islam that seems to be immune to criticism today, protected perhaps by progressive fashionistas, imbued in this woke craze of political correctness. But it sucks for them. That's what scholars do. And for all his failings, I think Henri Lammens remains a solid scholar that, even in death, can still run circles around the likes of Edward Said and his modern epigons. That's not what I wanted to do today, but here it is. I wanted to only speak for a couple of minutes, but I see that I've exceeded 15 minutes. Have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.